I promise this video is going to be riveting. Hey, I'm James, and this video is all about the basics of riveting, which is one of the fundamental ways of cold joining or attaching pieces together without using heat. I love cold joining in my own work, and if you've seen any of my ultimate compilations or my videos where I flip through them and everything, this has some great handouts and book excerpts on just the basics of riveting, so you can always check that out as well. Some of the first jewelry that I ever started making incorporated a lot of rivets. So these are really the first necklace I ever made and some of the first rings I ever made. And you can see there's several different rivets being used. I was very inspired by being from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and a lot of industrial inspirations with like bearings and retaining rings and things like that. So I have been riveting for decades, and I just love getting other people excited about cold joining. So if you're not familiar with a rivet or how it works, basically you have a precisely drilled hole through at least 2 layers of material, and then you have a section of wire. Now we're only going to talk about solid rivets. There are also tube rivets, and hammering on either side of that wire or rod will cause it to flare out and trap those 2 pieces of metal together. So that's pretty much all there is to it. Since it's a little tricky to see what's happening in the small details, I made this little prop. So imagine these 2 boards are 2 layers of metal, and this is a piece of wire or rod that's going through a hole that's been drilled in both sections of metal. And I've just put this window here just so you can see that it's precisely fit to the hole that's been drilled through. And then when you hammer on it, just like this oil clay, the ends will start flaring out, actually on both sides, because the bench pin or the anvil underneath, and then you'll go back and forth and kind of flip it around and make the head of that rivet. And just like on giant bridges and things like that, the flaring of the head of that will cause the 2 pieces of metal to be joined together. Now, I'm also going to use this to demonstrate what happens if the wire isn't precisely fit to the size hole that you drill. Okay, so here we have an illustration of your wire or your rivet is much smaller than the hole that you've drilled. And so if you started hammering it and wanted to try and rivet these 2 pieces together, what's going to happen is the wire is all going to bunch up and bend in there and not actually form any rivet heads that are going to trap your metal together. So that's why it's really important to have the exact size hole for the exact size wire or rod that you're going to be riveting with. All right, so now we're going to go through a couple different kinds of solid rivets, and there are a couple tools that are really great for setting up, and I've done some of that ahead of time just to save time in the video. One of them is to always center punch your holes, and if you've seen my cool tool on this snapper center punch, you know this is my favorite center punch of all time, but that's really important. And then you want to have a drill index so that you can precisely measure whether you're starting with the right size drill and matching it to wire that you have, or the wire to the drill bit or something like that. But this will precisely measure the wire that you're going to be working with the drill, and then that matches to a drill bit index. So all of these drill bits are numbered and correspond to those numbered holes in the measuring plate. So you can correspond those so you can drill the exact right size hole for the rivet that you're going to be working with. Also, after you drill the hole, it's very important to deburr it. So all of these little touches will make the overall job much better and much smoother. So just using a little handheld countersink will remove that burr from around the edge of the drilled hole. Another tool that I really like is a flat filing jig. So this can hold small pieces like the rivets, and you can file them so that they are exactly square to their length, which again is really important. So if they're cut on an angle and you're trying to hammer it, they're gonna mush off to the side and everything else. So making sure that you've set up all of these little precise details will make it go much smoother in the end. And last but not least, another really great tool are cup burrs. And so these are flex shaft tools that have teeth on the inside of this cup, and they can be really great for deburring the edge of the rivet. So again, you don't have any little hanging bits of metal that are going to get in the way or distract from the finished one. So it can be a lot easier to hold that cup burr in a pin vise so that you can move it by hand and just take that little burr off of the edge of the rivet. So these are just some basic tools to have around to get set up to go. And I've prepared that where I just have 2 pieces of brass and approximately an 1/8 inch copper rivet that I am going to rivet these 2 pieces together with. And I've made it a little bit larger than is typically done for jewelry, just so you can see a little bit better in the video. So I have the rivet, and that I've sawn it and filed it and deburred it. And the length of the rivet depends always on different situations of what you're making. And I've read all different versions where it should be 1/3 of the diameter of the rivet on each side or something like that. So you need to have enough material on either side of your sandwiched metal that it can be hammered and flare out into the head of the rivet. So it is a little bit of an experience thing, but typically I would say at least the diameter of the rivet is enough extending for you to get started and see how it goes. Now these are a little bit thicker and beefier than what's typically done, but we're just going to get started. So I like to start with a cross peen hammer, and so what that'll do when hammering the rivet is it'll spread it perpendicular to being struck. So if I hit the rivet this way, it's gonna the copper is gonna flare out towards the camera and away, and that'll start building the head of the rivet. So let's get to it. So I'm gonna tippy tap on one side a little bit to start flaring out the material, and then very quickly I'm going to flip it over so that it still extends through on the other side. So let me just tippy tap this down. So that I have enough material on the other side. And then I'll tippy tap again here, and that starts spreading the material. And then you can see I have a head on one side and a head on the other side. And then I'll switch to a ball peen, which will spread out the copper in a uniform head size. And I'm trying not to strike the metal that I'm capturing, but just making a nice rivet head. And you can see it's starting to sandwich and capture the metal together. And that's holding it already. But one thing that I like to do is rehead the rivet. So if you think of bridges and other industrial situations, they have what's called a bucking bar that they're going to hammer on both sides, and is going to re-round the head of those rivets. Now this is obviously smaller than a bridge, so there's some really great tools for jewelry. These are called nail sets, and they're used for taking finishing nails and just hammering them down flush to the surface of wood. But they have a really great hemispherical space in the end of them, and depending on the size of rivet that you're making, you can tippy tap those onto it, and that'll kind of rehead the rivet. Now in this case, where it's almost 1/8 of an inch, I've made a larger version of that. And so some of these tools, depending on the size of rivets I'm doing, I've made these tools to help rehead those rivets. And so again, you just use it like a punch. Position on your piece, get the right size that you might need for the size of head that you're making. And again, flip back and forth. And this is not a required step, but can just be a really nice way of finishing up that rivet head. And sometimes you can end up with a nice little rivet head just like that. Okay, so another variation of rivets is called a flush rivet. And so what I've done is I have countersunk the hole so it has a larger hole going into it. And when I hammer on the rivet head is going to spread out and be flush with the top surface of the metal. So rather than having the rivet head sticking out, it's going to be flat and flush. And so here we go. And again, start hammering on one side. Start spreading that rivet head with the cross peen. And make sure that you work back and forth evenly. And then you can switch to the ball peen to work it down into that. And then you can switch to the flat face of the hammer to work it down into that. And here you can see, it doesn't have a rivet head, it's flat and flush to the surface of the metal because it's spread out into that countersunk area. All right, and for this third kind I want to show, you can go online and purchase pre-headed rivets of different lengths and diameters. And so this can be easier if you're going to do a lot of rivets so that you don't have to flip back and forth and you already have a head on one side. So you would just focus on having enough material coming out the other side to match that one side. So just like with the previous rivets, but not flipping back and forth, I'll start with the cross peen and start spreading out the rivet without hitting my material. And then switch to the ball peen to even out the head. And then I can use, you can either just use the hammer or I can use a punch to sort of rehead that rivet. Try and get it to match the other side. Try some different sizes here. Nah, it's going to be too big. I learned this from metalsmith Boris Bally, and he would call this ice cream coning, especially if the head of the rivet would sort of spread out from the punch there. And so you have one head there, and then the pre-headed rivet is just going to get a little bit of a flat on it, and so it also becomes a nicely headed rivet. All right, so that covers the basics of solid rivets. There's lots of other different variations, including tubes and other kinds of cold joining like threaded connections, but I hope this gets you started, and I'd love to hear how it goes with your own adventures. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to hit that subscribe button so that you can hear from me when I post future videos. Thanks for stopping by.